Welcome back to Reddit Tales by Uncle Sammy. I see you, I appreciate you, and I'm thankful you subscribed and keep showing up. This space is built on your insights. Leave your thoughts and lessons below. Now, cue the tension, cue the truth. Let's get into it. Before the story starts, let me say one thing that matters here. When somebody begins rewriting ordinary facts into little private fictions, that is not just dishonesty, it is rehearsal. If your partner suddenly needs secrecy around basic things that never used to be secret, do not argue with your instincts just because the lie sounds tidy. In this story, the real danger was not the affair by itself. It was the moment a marriage stopped being a place for truth and became a contest over who could control the narrative first. The night my wife vanished, Baltimore smelled like wet brick, fryer grease, and the harbor after rain. I remember that because I was standing on our narrow porch in Hamilton, listening to the city bus hiss at the corner while my dinner went cold behind me. Rochelle had texted at 6:12 that she was wrapping up late at the gallery. At 9:47, our daughter Nia asked if she should save her mother a plate. At 10:03, I called for the fourth time and got sent straight to voicemail. At 10:11, my phone lit up with a message from my wife that did not sound like my wife at all. You should have stayed out of my bag. Now it is war. I read that message 3 times before I understood the words. Rochelle was not dramatic. She was measured, polished. The kind of woman who folded grocery receipts into perfect little squares and lined up her shoes heel to heel. Even angry, she usually sounded like a human resources memo. But that text had heat in it. It had a threat. I walked back into the dining room with my phone in one hand, and my chest tight enough to make breathing feel like work. Nia looked up from her algebra homework and knew something was wrong before I said a word. Before we go any further, I need you to tell me honestly, what would you do if your spouse vanished and then texted you a threat instead of an explanation? Drop your answer in the comments right now. And if you enjoy intense relationship drama stories with real consequences, hit like, share this story with someone who loves emotional twists, and subscribe for more stories like this. Mom still not coming? She asked. She was 14, too observant for my comfort. Wearing my old Morgan State sweatshirt with her hair tied up in a scarf she always lost and found again. I wanted to tell her no. Your mother is fine. Your mother is on the way. Your mother is still the woman you think she is. Instead, I said, go brush your teeth. I need to make some calls. She studied my face for a second too long, then stood and carried her plate to the sink. Rochelle had my patience. Nia had my eyes. That night, she also had my dread. My name is Ellis Boone. I was 39 that fall, a transit electrician for the city, the kind of man who could rebuild a failing panel box but could not always find the right sentence in a hard conversation. I woke up at 4:30 most mornings, drank community coffee from a chipped mug with faded Orioles logo, and listened to old gospel on AM radio, while I ironed my uniforms. I believed in routines because routines had carried me through layoffs, my father's stroke, and the first thin years of marriage when Rochelle and I were living on faith, overtime, and box pasta. Rochelle and I had been married 11 years by then. She was 37, executive director of a small arts nonprofit that ran youth programs, gallery events, and neighborhood mural grants. She wore clean lines, expensive perfume, and an expression that suggested she was always 3 steps ahead of the room. People trusted her quickly. She knew how to tilt her head, lower her voice, and make a donor feel wise for agreeing with her. I used to admire that. Then, somewhere along the line, I started noticing that the same talent worked at home too. Charm and concealment can use the same muscles. The text said war, because earlier that week I had opened the leather tote she never let out of reach. I did it after 2 months of swallowing questions until they tasted like blood. She had started sleeping with her phone face down, taking calls on the back steps, volunteering for weekend planning retreats, and guarding that bag like it held state secrets. I told myself I was being insecure. I told myself marriage required trust. Then I found a hotel key sleeve tucked inside a side pocket with a room number written in blue pen and no hotel name. I did not confront her that night. That was the first decision I made that could have gone another way. I could have marched into our bedroom with the key sleeve in my fist and demanded an explanation. I could have forced the lie out early. But Nia was in the next room studying for a biology quiz, and I had lived through enough adult shouting as a boy to know that children hear the shape of ruin even when they cannot catch every word. So I slid the sleeve back, closed the tote, and began paying attention in silence. Silence can be strategic, but it is not peaceful. The next few days, I watched Rochelle move through the house like a guest star playing my wife. She was too cheerful at breakfast, too careful with her wording, too quick to kiss my cheek when she needed to glide past me. She had always hummed while putting on earrings. Suddenly she stopped. She had always left books half open around the house. Suddenly every room looked staged. I noticed she started wearing a slim gold bracelet I had never seen before. It had a tiny square clasp shaped like a chess rook. That bracelet bothered me more than it should have. Maybe because Rochelle did not even like chess. I did. My grandfather taught me at a rec center off North Avenue when I was 9, and I still kept his old walnut chess clock on the bookshelf in our den. The thing clicked louder than it needed to, stubborn and old-fashioned, one of those objects that made time feel visible. Rochelle used to tease me about it. Only you would keep a time machine in the living room, she would say. Then one night, I saw the same rook shape reflected in the clasp and felt a cold little thought settle in. I started noticing names. Her phone lit up with donors and board members I recognized, but one name appeared without a surname and with no organization attached. Vernon. Just Vernon. Always late afternoon, always followed by Rochelle stepping outside or saying she needed to finish one last email from the car. When I asked once, she said he was a facilities consultant helping with a warehouse lease for an art storage project. She said it fast, like she had already practiced the sentence. I nodded because husbands nod a lot when they want to keep the temperature in the room bearable. The warehouse story might have held if Rochelle had not become so peculiar about Thursdays. Every Thursday, she started claiming evening donor dinners. And every Friday, she came home with a softness in her face that had nothing to do with fundraising. There's a look people get when they have placed themselves at the center of a private story. A brightness. A selfish kind of inward glow. She carried it into our kitchen while asking me about school and reminded me to mail the BG payment, as if infidelity and domestic management belonged on the same list. The first crack that gave me something real came from a place I never expected, Darnell's Barbershop on Harford Road. I had gone in on a Saturday morning because Darnell had been cutting my hair since college and because, if I am honest, I needed somewhere that still felt ordinary. The shop smelled like talc aftershave and hot clippers. Two men argued about the Ravens. Somebody's little nephew was sweeping hair into crooked piles. Darnell snapped the cape around my neck, caught my expression in the mirror, and said, "You look like you've been sleeping in your work boots." I almost said nothing. Then a man in the second chair, a real estate appraiser named Curtis I knew by face, mentioned a new gallery space opening near Station North. He said he'd seen that polished sister from East Baltimore Arts. There was some tall man in a camel coat who acted like he owned the block. Not her husband, Curtis added, casual as weather. My ears went hot under the cape. I kept my face still, because black men learn young how to keep from making their pain public in rooms that are not built to hold it. On the walk home, I decided not to tell myself any more calming stories. That was the second decision. That could have gone differently. I could have chosen denial, kept clinging to the version of Rochelle that made our household feel intact. Plenty of people do, but denial is expensive, and I had a daughter in a house and a mortgage that still had 18 years left on it. So I started documenting. Dates, excuses, card charges, mileage on a Honda, every retreat, every Thursday dinner, every small fracture between what Rochelle said and what the world quietly contradicted. What made it worse was that Rochelle was not cruel in obvious ways. She still remembered Nia's orthodontist appointment. She still stocked my mother's favorite tea before Sunday visits. She still stood in church beside me some weeks at New Psalm and sang the hymns in that clear alto that used to make me fall in love with her all over again. Betrayal is easier to fight when the betrayer is sloppy or mean. Rochelle was competent. She made her deceptions fit neatly around school forms and crockpot dinners. That neatness made me question my own mind. Then came the church fish fry in early October, the one my Aunt Geneva organized every year in the fellowship hall. Everybody was there balancing paper plates and gossip. Rochelle wore a rust-colored sweater dress and that same rook bracelet. Halfway through the evening, while she was helping plate coleslaw, her phone buzzed on the table beside the lemon cakes. I should have looked away. I did not. The preview flashed up before the screen dimmed. Same place Thursday. Missed your mouth. I stared at the words until they blurred, then covered the phone with a napkin so that I could unsee them. I did not confront her at church, because some truths should not be born in public. I carried folding chairs instead. I took out the trash. I laughed when somebody asked whether I was coming to men's choir breakfast. My body stayed at the fish fry, but my marriage ended there in my mind, between aluminum trays of whiting and a half-melted sheet cake. Driving home, Rochelle talked about donor fatigue and whether Nia needed a new winter coat. I answered in small sounds. She reached across the center console and squeezed my knee. Her hand felt like a stranger practicing familiarity. That Thursday, I left work early under the excuse of a migraine and drove downtown in my city truck, parking 3 blocks from the old textile building Rochelle claimed was under renovation for art storage. The street smelled like coffee grounds and damp concrete. Young people in black turtlenecks drifted in and out of design studios. Around 6:15, Rochelle's car pulled up. She got out in a cream coat, checked her lipstick in the side mirror, and waited on the sidewalk. A tall man in a camel coat crossed the street toward her. He touched the small of her back like it belonged there. His name, I would learn later, was Vernon Tate. 42, developer, board treasurer for 2 nonprofits. Smiled like a campaign poster. He had that polished Baltimore confidence that comes from knowing which doors open when you call the right cousin, the right councilman, the right lender. I watched Rochelle laugh at something he said, then follow him inside the building that was supposedly not yet operational. They did not look hurried. They looked practiced. That was what broke something in me. A secret can still feel impulsive. Practice means people have built a routine around your pain. I waited an hour, then another. Rain started tapping the windshield. I kept thinking about Nia at home reheating leftovers, about how Rochelle had told her she was serving the community. That phrase made me so angry my hand shook. I nearly stormed into the building twice. Both times I stayed put. Not because I was weak. Because anger loves theater, and theater rarely wins anything lasting. I needed facts. I needed enough of them. That Rochelle could not twist this into suspicion or paranoia or my failure to support her work. So I stayed in that truck until my lower back hurt. When Rochelle finally came out, her hair was slightly mussed and her face carried that private brightness again. Vernon handed her a folded sheet of paper. She slid it into her tote. Then he kissed her temple, a small intimate gesture that somehow hurt more than anything bigger would have. No drama, no rush. Just ownership. Rochelle drove home 27 minutes later and came inside carrying takeout from a Thai place she knew I liked, as if Pad see we could seal over what I had just watched. Long meeting, she said. I nodded and asked whether they had finalized the lease. Almost, she said without blinking. We are still arguing about HVAC and sprinkler code. I remember the exact sentence because I repair electrical systems for a living, and nothing about the building suggested active renovation. Her lie had details. That is another red flag people overlook. A liar who offers extra specifics is not being transparent. They are decorating. I smiled like a man who believed his wife and thanked her for dinner. Then I waited until she was asleep, took the folded paper from her tote, and read a printed dinner reservation for 2 in Fells Point under Vernon Tate's name. I copied it on my phone and put it back. The next morning, I called my cousin Marcel, who handles family law in Towson, and never uses more words than necessary. We grew up together, played summer ball together, buried our grandmother 2 pews apart. He listened without interrupting, then said, "Do not threaten. Do not announce. Get your paperwork together before you say one emotional thing." I hated how sensible he sounded, but I needed it. He referred me to an investigator named Patrice Knox, a former insurance adjuster with a church hat collection and eyes that missed nothing. Patrice met me at a diner near White Marsh, where the coffee was burnt and the booths had cracked red vinyl. She carried a legal pad and asked questions the way good mechanics test a failing engine, one system at a time. Schedules, finances, devices, child routines, property. I expected judgment. She gave me structure instead. People think cheating stories are about passion, she said, tapping her pen. Most of them are about logistics. Who had time? Who had access? Who thought nobody would compare the two? I hired her before my eggs got cold. Over the next 3 weeks, the shape of Rochelle's double life came piece by piece. Patrice documented Thursday meetings with Vernon at the Station North building, lunches at a harbor hotel, and one Saturday morning when Rochelle lied about a board retreat and spent 5 hours with him at a waterfront condo in Canton. She also found something else I had not been looking for. Rochelle had been moving money, not huge amounts. Small transfers from our joint savings into a separate account opened 6 months earlier at a credit union near her office. When Marcel reviewed the statements, his mouth flattened into that expression he gets when he is trying not to scare people before they deserve it. The total was just under $28,000. Enough to matter. Not enough to trigger an obvious disaster until too late. That is not weekend money, he said. That is exit plan money. Suddenly Rochelle's new secrecy looked bigger than an affair. It looked like preparation. Vernon was not just a man she was seeing. He might have been part of a second life she was building while still eating pot roast in my kitchen and asking Nia about debate club. I kept the house calm for Nia's sake, and that may be the hardest thing I've ever done. I signed permission slips. I attended her school presentation on environmental justice and clapped with the other parents while Rochelle sat 2 rows over smiling like we were still a team. Nia won honorable mention and asked if we could all go for fries after. Rochelle said she had an urgent call with a donor and kissed Nia on the forehead before leaving the parking lot alone. My daughter watched the taillights disappear and said, too softly, she always has somewhere else. Children do not need every detail to detect abandonment. That sentence haunted me. It also hardened my patience into resolve. Patrice advised me to wait until I had copies of everything. Bank records, photos, dates, text logs, proof of the lease Rochelle had co-signed with Vernon on a loft apartment in Mount Vernon. Yes, a loft. Exposed brick, freight elevator, oversized windows. The place looked like the kind of life people invent when they are tired of being ordinary on paper. Rochelle had been paying utilities there for 2 months. I stared at those bills like they were written in smoke. The bag I had stayed out of became central once I looked more carefully. One Sunday, while Rochelle sang in the choir loft, I checked a hidden inner zipper and found a slim silver key, a lipstick, and a folded sheet with 3 columns labeled Keep, Sell, and Fight For. Under Keep, she had written, Grandma ring, blue chair, Nia's art bin's passport. Under Fight For, custody schedule, nonprofit reputation, Boone House equity. There was no item for marriage because by then our marriage was not an item to her. It was a terrain feature. I wish I could say I confronted her immediately after that, but I did not. I waited because Marcel needed the copies authenticated and because Patrice was still tracking one final loose end. Whether Vernon knew Rochelle was moving money or believed she was simply reorganizing household funds. In the meantime, Rochelle grew more erratic. One evening she accused me of checking her mileage. Another time she asked Nia whether I had been acting weird. She was not just hiding. She was scouting. When guilty people feel the floor shifting under them, they start testing which walls might hold. The actual disappearance began on a Tuesday. Rochelle came home early, strangely light, and made jambalaya from scratch, something she only did when trying to restore mood. She lit the expensive candle from our 10th anniversary, the cedar one, and asked if we could just have a good night. The request itself told me she knew. We ate in near silence. Nia talked about a boy in geometry who kept borrowing pencils and never returned them. Rochelle laughed too hard at that story, then went upstairs with her tote while I washed dishes and listened to the chess clock tick in the den. At 8:50, she came down dressed for errands, not for bed. Jeans, boots, wool coat. I need to run to the office, she said. One of the interns locked supplies in the side room, and tomorrow's school visit starts early. I dried my hands and looked at her for a long second. You sure that is where you need to go? I asked. Her eyes changed. Just a flicker. Recognition. Then her face smoothed itself over. What is that supposed to mean? She said. I almost told her everything. Instead, I said, nothing. Be careful. She left. I waited 10 minutes and checked our home security app. The camera over the porch showed Rochelle getting into her car, backing out, then parking 2 houses down with the lights off. She sat there for 7 minutes, watching the house, watching whether I would follow. Then she drove away. I felt almost impressed by the coldness of it. At 9:31, Patrice texted me one sentence. Vernon's loft has lights on. At 9:47 came Rochelle's message. You should have stayed out of my bag. Now it is war. Followed by another. Try explaining to Nia why her father could not mind his own business. I was halfway to Mount Vernon before I realized my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold a wheel. Anger and fear make terrible drivers. I parked around the corner from the loft building, a converted warehouse with an iron-framed entrance and potted shrubs too expensive for the neighborhood. Vernon's silver Audi sat out front. Rochelle's Honda did not. I buzzed the unit listed under Tate Holdings and got no answer. The doorman on duty, a young Puerto Rican brother with tired eyes, told me no one had come in under my wife's description in the last half hour. That was when the fear shifted shape. Until then, I had assumed Rochelle was performing drama, hiding out with Vernon, forcing a confrontation on her terms. But if she was not there, where was she? I called again, straight to voicemail. I called her sister in Colombia. No, I called 2 women from the nonprofit board whom Rochelle liked enough to use. No, by midnight, I had filed a missing person report while trying not to sound like a husband manufacturing urgency out of marital chaos. The officer took notes, asked whether we had argued, and gave me a look that said domestic stories were rarely simple. Nia met me in the kitchen when I got home after 1 a.m. She had not slept. Her glasses were crooked, and she was holding the old chess clock in both hands the way some people hold pets. Is Mom okay? She asked. There is no clean script for answering your child when truth is already spilling across the floor. I told her mother was gone for the night, and that I was working to find her. Not exactly a lie. Not enough of the truth. Nia's jaw tightened, and she whispered, She knew you found something, didn't she? I looked at her, then really looked. She had known more than I had understood. Kids assemble stories from tone, timing, and the way doors close. She told me Rochelle had been keeping an overnight bag in the trunk for weeks. Told me she had once heard her mother crying in the laundry room, then laughing on the phone 10 minutes later. Told me Rochelle had asked whether, in a divorce, teenagers could choose where they wanted to live. I sat down because my legs stopped feeling reliable. Nia kept both palms on the chess clock and said, I did not know how to tell you. You do not have to carry that. I told her, none of this is on you. She nodded, but children are not built to surrender guilt quickly. I put her back to bed and stayed up until dawn at the dining room table with bank records, Patrice's notes, and Rochelle's were texts glowing on my screen. Around 5:20, Marcel called. He had reviewed the latest credit union activity. She emptied the separate account last night, he said. Cashier's check, 27.6. I asked whether that meant she was gone for good. He answered like a lawyer and a cousin at once. It means she planned. By afternoon, the story widened. Patrice found that Vernon had also vanished from his office, leaving an assistant to tell callers he was in Richmond on development business. His wife, because of course it was a wife, had apparently learned enough to start calling board members. Suddenly, I was not the only person sorting through deceit under fluorescent lights. Patrice also discovered Rochelle had deleted large chunks of her cloud storage, but missed one shared folder connected to our old family tablet. Inside were scanned copies of tax returns, Nia's birth certificate, our deed, and a typed document titled Possible Statements. Possible Statements was not a diary. It was a script, lines Rochelle had drafted for future use depending on how events broke. If Ellis becomes aggressive, frame concern around emotional withdrawal. If Vernon's wife contacts me, deny intimacy, emphasize mentorship. If Nia asks questions, say adults sometimes outgrow each other, and Dad invaded privacy. I read those lines in Marcel's office and felt something in me go still. Affairs are one level of betrayal. Training for the public relations aftermath is another. Rochelle was not just cheating. She was curating blame. The police found her car 2 days later in a long-term garage near BWI. That was almost a relief. It meant she had not been harmed in some random way my mind had begun inventing at 3 a.m. It meant leaving had been deliberate. She flew to Detroit under her middle name and checked into a boutique hotel with Vernon, using separate reservations. Patrice got that confirmed through a contact who owed her a favor. I sat in my truck outside work and laughed once, sharp and humorless. War, apparently, meant disappearing, and then waiting for me to look unstable. Rochelle called on the third evening from a blocked number. I put the phone on speaker so Marcel could listen. "You brought lawyers into a private matter," she said, voice low and controlled. "You searched my things. You humiliated me." I looked at the stack of evidence on the conference table and almost admired her discipline. "You stole from our household and planned to leave with my child half-informed." I said, "You do not get to call that private." She inhaled like I had offended protocol. "Nia is better with me than with your suspicious little routines." Marcel wrote one word on his pad: custody. That sentence told me where the real fight would be. Not romance, not pride, positioning. Rochelle wanted the moral upper hand, the appearance of reasonableness, and enough access to our daughter to keep calling herself the steady parent. I told her calmly that until she returned and addressed the financial transfers, housing arrangements, and lies, all communication about Nia would go through counsel. The line went silent. Then she said something I will never forget. "You always mistake quiet for weakness, Ellis." I answered, "And you always mistake polish for innocence." She hung up. The next month was paperwork, affidavits, school council meetings, and the kind of exhaustion that makes grocery aisles feel philosophical. Nia started seeing a therapist in Towson, who wore bright sneakers and asked hard questions gently. I moved money back under court supervision, changed passwords, and documented every contact attempt. Vernon's wife filed first and loudly, which unexpectedly helped me because it blew open the network of lies Rochelle was trying to manage. The nonprofit board placed Rochelle on leave after donors started calling. In communities built on grants and reputation, scandal travels faster than truth and lasts longer. Rochelle returned 6 weeks later looking immaculate and thinner, as if stress had edited her edges. She came to the custody hearing in a navy suit, carrying a notebook and the same rook bracelet. I had not seen her in person since the night she disappeared. For one stupid second, grief hit before anger did. That is how memory works. It offers you old tenderness on the same tray as new contempt. Rochelle testified that our marriage had been strained by emotional distance, and that she feared my surveillance behavior. Then Marcel introduced bank records, the loft lease, the scripted possible statements, and her own text. When the judge read "Now it is war" aloud, the room changed temperature. Rochelle's chin lifted, but I saw it then. Not shame exactly, more like irritation that the mask had slipped in a setting she could not charm. She did not lose everything that day. Real life rarely delivers that kind of neat thunderclap, but she lost ground. Temporary primary custody of Nia stayed with me. The court ordered supervised transitions until the financial issues were sorted. Rochelle's lawyer requested a recess twice. Vernon did not appear. Men like him often vanish right when accountability becomes fluorescent and official. After the hearing, Nia asked whether she had to see her mother that weekend. I told her the truth. The judge had set a schedule, but her feelings mattered, and we would move carefully. She cried in the car, not loudly, just a steady leaking grief that made me grip the steering wheel until my fingers hurt. "I still love her," she said, furious with herself for saying it. "You are allowed," I told her. Love is not a reward for good behavior. It is just not permission to be mistreated. That may be the most useful sentence I have ever spoken in my life. The next year did not heal cleanly. Rochelle bounced between rented rooms, consulting gigs, and image repair lunches with people tired of being managed. The nonprofit eventually asked for her resignation. Vernon sold his interest in one project and relocated to D.C., leaving Rochelle with promises and bills, but no shared future anyone could point to. Nia kept going to therapy, kept making honor rolls, kept sketching portraits at the kitchen table, while I learned how to braid the front of her hair without causing mutiny. Some nights I still sat by the old chess clock and listened to it tick like a stubborn heart. Rochelle and I now speak mostly in concise emails and the brittle politeness of school events. Sometimes she still tries to revise the story, usually by shaving the edges off her own choices. Sometimes she sounds genuinely tired, like a woman finally meeting the cost of all the scenes she staged. I do not hate her, though I did for a while. Hate is hot and useful at first. Then it becomes another room you are paying to maintain. What I do have is clarity. She did not vanish because she was trapped. She vanished because exposure interrupted her script. Before this story ends, I want to hear from you. Was Rochelle's disappearance the real betrayal? Or was the real betrayal the secret planning, the lies, and the way she tried to rewrite the truth after getting caught? Leave your verdict in the comments. And if this story kept you with me all the way through, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this, because the next one might hit even harder. The last time Nia and I saw Rochelle for dinner, my daughter came home, kicked off her boots, and said, "Mom still thinks words can fix timing." I looked at her and laughed softly because 14 had become 15 and my child was turning into somebody precise. Outside, a bus sighed at the corner. In the den, my grandfather's chess clock clicked into the quiet. I thought about that first text again, the one that called itself war. It was never war. War suggests equal surprise on both sides. This was the consequence. This was the truth arriving slower than I wanted, but right on time. What stays with me from this story is not Rochelle's disappearance by itself. It is the planning behind it, the scripted statements, the hidden account, and the way Nia had been quietly carrying what the adults refused to name. A boundary is not only about catching betrayal. It is about refusing to let somebody turn your confusion into their shield. Once I stopped arguing with evidence and started protecting my child, the story changed. Not because the pain vanished, but because the performance did at the end.